Hi dear friends, welcome today. Today is Jojo. Today is the celebration of where heaven and earth come closest together in the whole of the year, and where we worship Xiwangmu. Xiwangmu is the goddess of the immortals, and we are going to tell you a little bit today about Xiwangmu. The moment when this video is coming out is most likely, considering my busy agenda today, a little bit later than Jojo is today, but I would like to still inform you about Jojo and what it actually means and what it could mean for you, and you can celebrate it, of course, always next year. Thank you, dear friend, for listening. I hope you enjoy the video and that you join us in our studies of Daoism and Daoist health. And for this we have to ask ourselves a few questions. Welcome today in the video about Xiwangmu. Xiwangmu has always fascinated me personally, because Xiwangmu, as the elder mother goddess of many goddesses, has a very interesting story which is very relevant for the practice of Daoism. My initiation into the Xiwangmu cult has been when I was like 26 almost, and this was with Master Liu, when he was teaching me all kind of Daoist practices and basic folk ritual for doing ceremonies towards different divinities for immortality purposes. At the same time, he was showing me a lot about Daoist medicine, which I later on, when I was living in Wudang, I became a Wudang Pai member.
I've been studying at Longmen Daojao also for a long time. I have been learning a lot of different kind of things that were complementing and supplementing and confirming the things that Master Liu did teach me.
One of the most fascinating things is that in the West actually very little is known about Xiwangmu. So for me, my fascination was first like, okay, how do I confirm all these fantastic stories? One of the issues I faced was, how do I confirm all these fantastic stories about Xiwangmu and its history? And over time, I have been in the opportunity to confirm a lot and to actually find out a lot more than I did before. Xiwangmu has a name which can be explained in many different ways, and mostly it is explained in the literal sense.
Queen Mother West.
Because she is associated with the western direction. She is associated with the Mount Kunlun, where she resides and where she has a garden in which there is a peach tree, and on this peach tree grows fruit every few thousand years, 3,000 years usually is estimated, and sometimes she gives pieces or peaches to people who she thinks they are worth to become an immortal. As part of the immortalist cult, you actually worship Xiwangmu as if she is your mother, of course. And at the moment when you do so, you dedicate yourself at the same time to your immortality. It is in her upbringing to bring you to that point, and that has to do with Xiwangmu's history. Xiwangmu in itself was originally, most likely, a finding from early graves in China, a snake goddess, or a snake, basically a snake spirit. Like in Chinese culture history, we talk about a lot of different kind of animal spirits that gradually cultivate themselves and they nest themselves into the human society to make that transition from their animal state into a divine state. Many goddesses, they have a history as animals, like Kuan Yin, Dongmu, and so on. They started originally as animal spirits and they gradually passed through a human stage, and as a result of that they eventually found divinity. Some of their past, of course, remains part of their history. When I was in Boston University for a Daoist conference in, some time ago, Then at that moment I went to one of the libraries there because I had found online that they have a history book about the history of Xiwangmu, which was very rare. I copied the pages of the book and I took it with me for my research, and I've been collecting material about Xiwangmu actually already since 1990 something. And one of the things that was found from graves is that originally she was a snake living in graves, and she was seen as a divinity, as a protector of the dead. So she was originally a earth goddess, and in that sense she is related to the hell world and to Fengdu and all the demons and emperors of the underworld, which is very interesting because in Chinese culture in general it has been considered that if you die, first thing you do is you go into the underworld. Of course, people were buried. Nowadays they are often being cremated, but in the past people were buried because in the underworld you could do good for your family afterwards. Of course, it is a family-based religion, and as a parent you would die, or as a child you would die, you would still have a function in the family, namely through the underworld. And the underworld population, in our Christian sense, of course, is mostly hellish creatures, and in the Chinese culture that became like that, but originally the underworld was just a society of ghosts and spirits. There was an interesting study of which I will give you the title here, and that one showed that the concept of qi was originally most likely derived from the wandering ghosts of the dead that did not have a place in the underworld because, well, frankly, nobody remembered them, and as a result of that they became sort of abstractions, and the character of qi in that sense is a combination of the character of a map of the world and basically the Pakwa, you can say, and the character of a ghost. That person was then contracted or contacted by another living creature. It would try to cling on to it, and as a result of that maybe harass it because of its annoyance about nobody caring for it. And then in that case it would be called a sha, and if it would be beneficial one way or the other, it could be harnessed, then it would be a qi, and that would be an environmental qi. And this is the origin of the concept of many pathogenics from the environment, because some ghosts prefer to live in this environment and some ghosts prefer to live in another climate. So the pathogenics, as such, they were considered to be former humans or former animals. In the same way, animals, they have a particular kind of intelligence. The Chinese culture originally was more than now an animist culture, and people were looking at all creatures and things to have a certain kind of intelligence or consciousness. And animals as such also, they have a particular kind of consciousness and smarts about it. I remember when I was doing my cave retreat in the cleft on the Wudang mountain, and there was next to the cabin, no, next to the cave where I was sitting, because there was no cabin, there was a small narrow path about 10 centimeters, 15 centimeters wide, and I could go from there into the cleft that goes all the way up on the mountain. In there was an old hermitage. The hermitage was fallen apart. There was only a ground floor, and this ground floor had just a few leftovers of walls, so it was not used anymore, but probably was used for meditation purposes. And you could see in the area around it, it used to be cultivated. There was a small lake in which people could wash and so on, and there was water coming from higher up the mountain. One day I was walking in my bare butt on this area. I was exploring the area, and one moment I see a large white snake between the stones under my feet, and the snake and me, we were both very surprised because I didn't expect a snake about 10 centimeters diameter, and it was looking at me like, oh, what is happening here? And I was looking at it like, oh, what is happening here? The same way. And the snake and me, we came to a sort of an understanding in which we were both on the edge of panic. You could really see in each other's eyes like there was this panic. The snake didn't know what to do, and I didn't know what to do. So I stood there on one leg in my favorite posture since that time. That is this one. You remember this one? A fun posture. to practice, but I was looking at that moment downwards in my hand. And as a result of that, at a certain point the snake decided to leave. And the white snake actually is the symbol of Xiwangmu in her original form. It belongs to the western direction, and this is where the name Xiwangmu comes from. You see, I turned the whole story around. That's an explanation technique. When you look at the name Xiwangmu, though, the Daoists among themselves, they call her Xiwangmu, they mean Grandmother West. Grandmother West in that sense because of her affiliation, her marriage with the Jade Emperor, who is ruling the Tianxia, the below heaven, from heaven. As such, as a snake goddess, she rises up into heavens quite high, and she is the wife of the Jade Emperor. There are goddesses who are higher than her, because the three gods of creation, they also have their own wives next to their attendants and generals and spirit armies. These goddesses, this goddess as such, has then made this transition, and from being originally a snake, which is a relatively malignant animal, gradually became a benign spiritual being, which was having a task in the heavenly pantheon. She lives on Mount Kunlun, as I said, and Mount Kunlun is a reversed mountain, and the mountain hangs in the sky in the west, and at the moment that you worship her, you bow to the west. And on a day like today, that is actually what you're supposed to do. You burn incense, you bow to the west, and you do your prayers. And at the moment when you do your prayers, you do also your hand forms, and you renew your vows, basically. At the moment when it is a Jojo, at the moment when you compare the name of Xiwangmu as Grandmother West, it is very interesting to also compare this to the names of Lao Tzu and Kongzi. Kongzi is very often described as the teacher, but you see that Lao Tzu actually also means grandfather, and grandfather is an earth god also at the same time, because Lao Jun is the heavenly god of the earth. And Dao De, you know that the Tao Te Ching is written with the idea of representing the way how earth, heaven and human beings interact with each other, and what the role of the sage is. And as such, you can see that Xiwangmu actually is a sage like that, who learned to transcend her own realm and is able to move between realms, and now she lives permanently in the heavens. Xiwangmu is very widely revered. She has a variation in Korea, she has a variation in Japan, and she even has a variation in Vietnam. So that means that she really belongs very deeply into the East Asian culture. In Japan, the Xiwangmu is called Seopo, and in Korean she is called Xiwangmu, which is more like the Chinese. And I hope I pronounce this right, Tai Vurongmao. And I'm quite sure I just mangled up the Vietnamese. So for my Vietnamese friends, I'm really sorry. Of course, she is honored in many different kind of ways, and her iconography and her functions, they have been added to over time. And the first mentioning of her is like already in the Shang dynasty. So this is a very, very early time. The first mention of the Queen Mother date back to the Shang dynasty in 1766 to 1122 BC. So that's already a pretty long time ago. And it said in one inscription, on the crack making, on the 9th day we make offering to the Eastern Mother and the Western Mother, and there will be approval. So that means there were two mothers, one of the East and one of the West. The East, of course, is where the sun is giving birth, and in the West is where the moon has been given birth. So in that sense, you can see that these are both important, and Xiwangmu was in that time already associated with the undergoing sun and with the world of the dead. And the East Mother, well, we're not going to go into that part right now. The descriptions of Xiwangmu vary over time, but in general we can say that the most important one is from the Shanghai Jing, the classic of the mountains and the seas, where she is described as a woman with tiger teeth.
Woman with tiger teeth and a
ferocious nature.
Partly because of her meeting up with Daoism, actually she became civilized, and from a demon goddess from the underworld, she transformed herself into Xiwangmu as we know now, of course. And instead of bringing pestilence to the world, she actually became a goddess who helped people to become an immortal and transfer themselves from not going into the underworld to not being a ghost exactly, but to become an immortal. And as such, she plays an important role in schools like mine. Zhuangzi also mentions the Queen Mother of the West. He said that nobody knows the beginning and nobody knows the end of Xiwangmu. So in that time of Zhuangzi, 2500 years ago, it was known that she was already a very old and revered goddess, and that she played a major role in the world. In the Tang Dynasty, they described her further, and there were all kind of beautiful pictures from her. I have a series of wall panels that I cannot display in this place about Xiwangmu, and where is described her birthday party, which is at the beginning of the year, in opposition to the 9-9. The 9-9 is the period when the autumn actually really begins. The birthday of Xiwangmu was actually at the beginning of the year, when she is renewing herself, and is also therefore related to the Chinese New Year. Usually her birthday is celebrated at the third month of the third day of the third month. In that sense, the 9-9 is 3 times 3, so that means that the empowerment from that day is much bigger, because this is a day of action, while in effect the celebration of the birthday of Xiwangmu doesn't really add something other than that you show your respect to the goddess, which of course is very important. In the Bamboo Annals, Emperor Sun, he said that there were messengers from the Xiwangmu coming to him, so she does come down to the earth, and as a result of that, it is important to note that when you have a meeting with Xiwangmu, it's actually very significant. And in Xiwangmu cult, you go into a particular kind of trance, and as a result of this trance, you actually eventually can receive in these meditations a audience with Xiwangmu, depending on your lifestyle and how much you're dedicated and so on. In a similar way, in a similar fashion, there are particular kind of meditations related to Xiwangmu, where you rise up to the moon and you come to spend time with the moon goddess, and therefore learn the secrets of immortality from the moon rabbit, who is the assistant that the moon goddess is actually guarding. And well, it's actually quite a romantic story that you have to go through to get to that point. So that's a very tantric background of Daoism, which many people, they don't even know about, even though they are their whole life already a Daoist monk. The Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of the Qin Empire, he also was a worshipper of Xiwangmu, and this is the reason why he built his terracotta army. He said because of his work, he was hoping to please Xiwangmu so much that he would receive the mandate of heaven, but he didn't. So that means that the longevity of empires also is arranged by Xiwangmu. And of course, when we talk about the setting of the sun, where the living things go to, an empire, a company, a family, all these kind of things, they have their own life cycle, and these life cycles can be arranged and healed, and this is the art of feng shui and the prediction of the development, and where important crises will come is the role of Ming Shu. And then the individual events and the morality of things can be investigated through the I Ching. Talking about I Ching, reference to the Grandmother West name we mentioned before. In the I Ching also is mentioned in hexagram number 35, Wangmu. It says one receives boons from one's Wangmu grandmother, and that is also a reference to Xiwangmu is often considered. Moreover, Wangmu was also very often considered the title for female ancestors. What is interesting is that Xiwangmu is not alone, and I still have somewhere a banner of her accompanies, while getting proper depictions from Xiwangmu is much more difficult. But she was accompanied by Yunu, and these are jade maidens, jade girls, who are accompanying them, and they are dancers and musicians, and they play chimes, flutes, mouth organ, jade sounding stones, so they were like a music band. And this combination of 9 jade ladies is still, of course, a very important combination of music bands in the Chinese culture, because it's a legendary amount. The number 9 as such, in that sense, is also the number of well, Jojo 99, the Xiwangmu. The elegies of Chu actually discuss these dancers in the relationship. Also in some Han poems they are being described. The Jade Maids do not only just dance and make music and accompany her, but they also serve as messengers for her, so they do her biddings. And what they do is, usually when people are doing their meditations and their cultivations, they visit them as visions and teach them about all kind of things that are relevant for their practices. So this is a part of Daoism that is very often overlooked, and that is being reserved as knowledge for the more experienced Daoists, is that at a certain point you open up your mind in such a way that your understanding of reality gradually allows you to make a deep connection with information streams of the universe, and as a result of that make connection with these kind of divinities, through which you can obtain deeper information. And it is going on with many other meditation cycles. For instance, when you do the stepping to the 7 stars meditation, or when you do the meditations for absorbing the luminosity of the 3 pure ones, and if you do practices like eradicating the 3 worms, and you employ the armies of heaven for that, then at that moment, all these kind of moments, you go together with a certain kind of trance moments, which in some ways are very shamanic, and which are also at the same time a sort of an explanation. Yeah, explanation probably is the right word for why Taoism did connect in the way as it did. Like Strickman says, to get rid of tantric witchcraft, which was running into China at that moment and starting to create the sort of irrational chaos in the nation, as we also now experience in our modern society through our modern spiritual movements. Xiwangmu is often shown in graves, actually, not just one, but yeah, she's often there in bronzes and murals, in painted lacquers, in clay tiles, stone reliefs, and so on. Usually she is depicted in the context of funerary rituals, and always signifying the western direction. She is important because the western direction is when your house is seated there, your front door is facing the west. The western direction actually drains your house. So normally you would prefer a house where your door is not directed towards the west, but you're directed towards the east. A direction towards the south is good, but it is pretty intense at the same time, because the sun and the power of the sun comes into your house pretty strongly, so that can be difficult. Like I have here my office, and my main desk is at the northern direction, which is the direction of the underworld and the winter, which gives a particular kind of result. When I'm moving to my office downstairs, then my office will be directed towards the south, which will be completely different. So I am expecting the nature of my clinic and my videos and my materials in general, also for the education plan, to change. I don't know yet in what way, because I still have to experience it. I never had an office facing towards the south. I always had offices facing towards the north, because as a painter you like the northern direction because of the diffuse light, which gives you a clearer vision on things. In the same way, in the western light, when you want to get rid of all kind of issues, then at that moment facing your meditation chair in the western direction in the evening, of course, is very beneficial. And this is now what you do at the day of Xiwangmu, when heaven and earth is getting close together, which is related to the Yuan-Chi meditation. So the Yuan-Chi meditation is essential as part of the Xiwangmu worship. At the moment when you do that, you actually create revival. So you ask for revival, and it is basically a request that you send at the moment when you do a meditation on a day like this, and you do a ritual like this. You burn your incense, 3 incense sticks, and you pray to Xiwangmu with your heart, of course, and you do breathing exercises, because breath is related to the West, and you basically reverse the evening process. So you see that the breath goes up and down, and when you breathe in, this is the sun rising, and when you breathe out, this is the sun setting. And then the break in between is where the sun goes towards the mulberry tree in the other side of the planet, and then from there actually comes back in the morning, carried by a black crow and being flown over the sky back to the west, of course, and then everything starts again. So every evening you pray to Xiwangmu a bit. You do your Yuan-Chi meditation to renew yourself in the evening. And at the moment when you are on a day like that, it is the most likely moment of the year to make a real contact with Xiwangmu, because heaven and earth are very close. That means that your access to the Jade Emperor, to the divinities and the immortals in heaven are the largest, in the same way as your connection with the earth deities are most large. So that means you could also contact the dead most easy on a day like that, and that is also shown in celebrations like St. Martin and also Halloween, of course, where we deal with the dead. And also in the Chinese period of this time is the month of the ghosts. Xiwangmu was not only seen only as the god of the dead. In the history we see that common people very often see Xiwangmu as a savior, as a protector, and even as a healer. So they pray also to Xiwangmu as a healer, because of course she is a mother goddess. She is the mother of all the immortals. And as a result of that, by praying to Xiwangmu, you actually might have the benefit of having a benefit from her. One of the names of Xiwangmu is Jinmu Yuanjun, Metal Mother, Primordial Ruler. She is a great female principle of Tai Yin, the moon. Tai Yin in the body is associated with the lungs. It is the channel that rules the breathing, and as such it is also related to autumn, to death, to grief, and so on. So normally when you grieve, you ask for strength to Xiwangmu. When you are in grief, of course, you feel your vitality is being drained in a similar way as the blood is being drained, because then the chi becomes very weak. When we are infected by diseases like COVID, in this time people can be affected, and at that moment the vitality also goes out, and as a result of that they actually also lose the power of their chi, and the body becomes slack and powerless, and their voice also becomes powerless as a result of that. So in that sense, the Tai Yin channel and the autumn and the west and the breathing, they're all associated with Xiwangmu. Another rather controversial point that I would like to point out is that the 9 stars of the Big Dipper, nowadays we see only 7, but in the past there were supposed to be 9, they are also associated with the Jade Maiden from the Xiwangmu. And nowadays the 9 dippers, the 9 stars from the Dipper, or the 7 stars of the 9 Dipper, the 9 stars of the Dipper, they're also associated with 9 male deities, which are associated to the 3 pure ones. It is clear though that the goddess Grandmother West is undergoing quite a lot of changes over time, and as a goddess she is clearly a remnant of more matriarchal times in Chinese religious thought and spiritual thought. Over time She has been partly diminished but not disappeared, but she has always been associated with the number 9, and the number 9 as such is the big yang, 3 times 3, and 1 and 2 also together joined are 3, and 3 times 3 is 9, of course, so it's all Taoist numerological mysticism. I don't want to go into that right now. I will do that in the I Ching class. But the number 9 as great yang is usually in modern sources associated with male power, with yang power as such. And this is the confusion, because people very often associate yang with male, but in fact male are associated with yang. Yang is just yang, and that's it. And that means that the Queen Mother West having an association with yang or being very young is not a weird thing. It's actually a major thing, because you can say she was the yang in the yin, she was the empowerment goddess in the earth.
Dus another one. Dus another one. You also do another one then. Yeah.
How long do I stand here?